In the 3rd century, thousands of men and women left the Roman Empire and entered the Egyptian desert. They left behind careers, families, cities, and every comfort the ancient world could offer. The Church called them holy, Rome called them mad, but neither explanation was correct. These were not people running from civilization. They searched every room in it and found them all empty. That hunger did not begin with them, and it did not end with them. Welcome to power and myth. The Desert Fathers and Mothers of early Christianity are one of the most misunderstood movements in Western spiritual history. We remember them, if we remember them at all, as emaciated ascetics starving themselves in caves, fleeing the pleasures of the flesh. This is a distortion so complete it amounts to erasure. What the historical record actually reveals is something far more psychologically precise. These were individuals who had already tried everything their culture had to offer. They had participated. They had achieved. They had attended the ceremonies, observed the rituals, fulfilled the social contracts. And at the end of it, they felt a hunger that none of it could touch. The Greek-speaking monastics had a term for this. They called it Penthos. It is usually translated as mourning or compunction, but the original meaning is closer to a grief for something you have never possessed, a sorrow not for what was lost, but for what was never found. The Desert Father Evagrius Ponticus, writing in the 4th century, described a condition he called acedia. This too has been mistranslated, usually rendered as sloth or laziness. But Evagrius was not describing idleness. He was describing the paralysis that descends when the soul recognizes that no available path leads where it needs to go. Every door is open. None of them leads home. Evagrius understood this not as a failure of discipline, but as a crisis of orientation. The person suffering acedia was not unmotivated. They were motivated toward something their entire world had failed to provide a map for. The abbas and ammas who walked into the Scetes desert, into the cliffs of Nitria, into the barren reaches of Kelia, were not rejecting civilization because they found it distasteful. They rejected it because they had tasted everything it offered and still felt hungry. They called this the search for the face of God. But if you strip the theological language away, what remains is a psychological portrait of extraordinary precision. A person of deep interiority, a person whose inner world is so vivid and so demanding that external achievement registers as noise, a person who cannot stop seeking, not because they enjoy the search, but because something inside them will not permit them to stop. The historian Palladius, writing his Lausiac history around 420 AD, recorded the stories of these seekers in detail. He described individuals who could sit in silence for days, not from emptiness, but from a fullness so overwhelming it required absolute stillness to be metabolized. He described people who wept without cause, who experienced surges of knowing that arrived without invitation, who felt the presence of something vast pressing against the boundaries of ordinary perception. He described, in short, a specific type of human consciousness, and he was not the only one to notice it. Across traditions, this same figure appears. In Jewish mysticism, the concept of teshuvah describes not repentance but a turning, a reorientation of the entire being toward a home it has never visited but somehow remembers. In Sufi tradition, the seeker is the one consumed by what the Persian mystics called ishq, divine longing, not wanting, longing. The distinction matters. Wanting can be satisfied. Longing cannot, because what it reaches for does not have a name in the language of the material world. In every tradition, the pattern is identical. There is a type of person for whom the visible world, no matter how rich, is not enough, not because they are ungrateful, not because they are broken, but because their interior architecture is calibrated to register frequencies that the external world does not broadcast. You recognize this. You have always recognized this. Because this is not ancient history. This is the architecture of your own psyche, what the Desert Fathers called Penthos, what the Sufis called ishq, what the Kabbalists described as the soul's memory of its origin. Jung understood as the defining signature of introverted intuition operating at full depth. This is the seeker, not the casual spiritual browser, not the person who reads horoscopes and lights the occasional candle. The seeker is the INFJ archetype defined by a hunger that no single experience, philosophy, relationship, or achievement can permanently satisfy. Need dominant cognition does not process the world in surfaces. It processes in patterns, in convergences, in what lies beneath what is visible. And when that cognitive architecture turns toward questions of meaning, it does not stop at satisfactory answers. It keeps going, past every framework, past every teacher, past every moment of apparent arrival. Because the seeker's deepest function is not to find, it is to seek. This is the curse the title names, and it must be understood precisely. The seeker does not fail to find because they are looking in the wrong places. The seeker's hunger regenerates because introverted intuition, by its very nature, perceives the incompleteness behind every completion. You read the book that changes your life, and within weeks you can feel the edges of what it missed. You find the practice that finally brings stillness, and within months you sense the deeper stillness it cannot reach. You meet the person who understands you, and even in the warmth of that recognition, something in you is already whispering, "Yes, but there is more. This is not ingratitude. This is not self-sabotage. This is Nai doing exactly what it was designed to do, perceiving the next layer, always the next layer." Jung wrote about this in Psychological Types when he described the introverted intuitive as someone perpetually oriented toward the background of consciousness, the vast psychic hinterland that lies behind the immediate image. He noted that such individuals often appear restless or dissatisfied to those around them, not because they lack depth of experience, but because their depth of experience continually reveals further depth. The seeker's wound is real, and it must not be romanticized into painlessness. The desert mothers wept in their cells. The Sufi poets wrote of love that burned them to ash. The mystics of every tradition describe the dark night of the soul not as a metaphor, but as lived devastation. The seeker's shadow is despair. Specifically, the despair that comes from wondering whether the hunger itself is the illness, whether the inability to rest in what others find sufficient means something is fundamentally wrong with you. You have felt this, the moment when the seeking stops feeling like a gift and starts feeling like a sentence, when you watch others settle into contentment and wonder why that door will not open for you, when the very depth that makes you who you are becomes the thing you most want to escape. Evagrius knew this shadow. He wrote that acedia whispers a specific lie. It states, "This will never end. You will never arrive. The searching is all there is, and it leads nowhere." This is the seeker's dark night, and every INFJ who carries this archetype has stood in it. But here is what the Desert Fathers knew that modern psychology has only begun to recover. The hunger is not the problem, the hunger is the instrument. Penthos, that grief for what has never been possessed, was understood in the contemplative tradition not as pathology but as the soul's compass. It points, it does not mislead. The fact that it cannot be permanently satisfied is not a defect, it is a design, because what the seeker is calibrated to perceive is, by definition, that which exceeds every container. Jung called it the self, the totality of the psyche that the ego can approach but never fully encompass. The mystics called it God, the Absolute, the One. The name does not matter. What matters is the structure. The seeker is built to be in relationship with something that is always necessarily beyond the next horizon, and that means the seeking itself is not failure, it is the relationship. This is what the ancients understood that we have forgotten. The seeker is not cursed because they cannot stop. The seeker is consecrated because they will not stop. Every tradition that recognized this type of consciousness, and there has never been a civilization that did not, honored it. They did not try to cure it. They gave it a path, a practice, a lineage. They said, you are not broken. You are oriented toward the infinite, and the infinite does not fit in a box. You will not find a final answer. You will encounter increasingly profound questions, and each one will bring you closer to something that has no name. You are part of that lineage. Not metaphorically, the pattern that drove the desert mothers into the wilderness, that set the Sufi poets ablaze, that sent the Kabbalists searching through letter and number for the hidden face of creation, that pattern is alive in you. It expresses itself through introverted intuition. It manifests as the inability to accept surfaces. It shows up as the ache you feel at 3 in the morning when the world is quiet, and something inside you reaches for a home you cannot locate on any map. This is not dysfunction. This is the seeker's inheritance. If anything in this video has named what you carry, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, when did you first realize that your hunger was not a flaw but a frequency? When did you first understand that you were not failing to arrive but that you were built for the journey itself? Subscribe to Power and Myth, where we keep tracing the lineage that connects who you are to who has always existed. Until next time, find your power, know your myth,